My aim for this book was really to tell the stories of different companies in different parts of Asia, because these companies are looking at selling insurance to a population that often had no idea what insurance actually is. If you have never been in touch with that, the way these companies manage to market to a population with such a low financial literacy and still are able to sell insurance online, it's just incredible. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, not only for, if you're in Asia or if you're operating in a market with low financial literacy, but taking some of these lessons learned and actually also apply them to a more mature market and understand how can we better market and distribute insurance also in other places. Hi, this is Theresa Blissing, and this is The Future of Insurance.
Theresa, it's great to sit down with you, and you and I have been sitting down together a lot lately, working on why we're here to have you on the show today, and we'll get into that. But before we do, can you give people who maybe don't know who you are a bit of background? I think a lot of people do know who you are, but there's probably a few out there who don't yet.
Yes, Bryan, absolutely. I've actually spent my entire life in insurance, and I mentioned this in my upcoming book, right? I was born into an insurance family, so my dad and my mom were running an insurance agency out of the childhood home where I grew up. So insurance was really all around me from the day I was born. I then joined Generali in 2004. Worked for the group for 10 years, and in 2015 decided there must be more in life than just working for an insurance carrier. And I decided to go back into academia, did my master's, and did an academic research study on the adoption of big data in the insurance industry in Southeast Asia. And that was really my start into all things more tech and innovation in insurance. And I found it fascinating. And also, why Asia, right? When I was working for Generali, I spent a time at the Generali Asia regional headquarters in Hong Kong and absolutely fell in love with the region and also the insurance industry there. And especially if you're looking at developing Asia and how different this was to my home market in Germany, right? Like a very mature, saturated market. And then I spent almost a decade in Asia Pacific, lived in Hong Kong, lived in Bangkok, Jakarta, spent way too much time in Singapore, lived in Sydney, and also started the Asia InsurTech podcast together with Michael Waits. That was back in May 2019. So we are one of these few podcasts that have actually started before the pandemic.
Yes.
And and this is also how we met, right? Through the Asia InsurTech podcast.
Yeah, you had me on, even though my first book had nothing to do with Asia, but there's a lot going on, and it was great to get connected with you and Michael. And you have been at this for quite a long time, and you've recently released you started a new podcast as well, which, I've been fanboying on. The conversations are fantastic, but do you want to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have recently relocated to New York City, right? To, just add another continent I have lived on.
Yeah, why not?
Now the reason is my husband is working for the United Nations, and it was a great opportunity for us to spend a few years in New York. Now with me here being in the US and with the Asia InsurTech podcast, surprisingly, we actually have a large audience in the US and in Europe, because so many people are interested in what is happening in that part of the world. And then naturally, there always come the questions like, hey, can I be on the show? And you mentioned it, we had you on the show because, we do want to provide a platform for these great global thought leaders. And so now with me being in New York, we decided that is the time to maybe start a separate show, still keeping the Asia InsurTech podcast, because I think it is still important to provide this platform to tell the Asian success stories. But also now we have InsurTech amplified on a more global level. It's been really exciting.
Well, it is a great show. I will link to both of your shows in the show notes. But you also set up the reason why we're talking here today, which was a feeling that I have. I've been writing these books about primarily the U.S. context. And, U.S. startups, U.S. incumbents, U.S. markets and regulations and all that. And it's not that those lessons from those stories aren't relevant or interesting elsewhere, but the context's really different. and the kinds of things that are going to develop in this market or the Western European market or really any market can be quite particular to the dynamics of that market. And I had a desire to move that story beyond the at least North America, but not just the US context. But the reality is I'm not qualified to do that. And for everything you were just describing, as I thought about different markets to focus on, when I thought about Asia, there's really no one else I could talk to, at least that I knew. And for all the things that you just described around your shows and what you've been trying to do. And so, yeah, I reached out to you with a harebrained idea, and now here we are. So tell people a little bit about the idea and what you've been working on that we've got some announcements to make around.
Yeah, no, I've just completed after a really long time and many months of working on this actually together. Really appreciate your help here. But writing a book on what is happening in Asia, in addition to your Future of Insurance series, the fourth book in that series, I'm really excited about that. And yeah, we have been working on this for over a year now and managed to have 8 amazing case studies of innovative players in the insurance space in Asia. And yeah, really, really excited to announce that the book is scheduled to be released on October 17th.
Yes. So not long after people are listening to this, if they're listening when this is released, and it's already available for pre-order on Kindle, and we'll have paperback and hardcover and Audible as well. But the stories are fascinating, and I think, and I'd love to get more from you on this. But when I look at Asia and the market there, yes, it's a newer insurance market, but it's quite developed versus like Africa, which has a lot of other similarities to Asia, but the insurance markets aren't as developed. So it's a really interesting, it's an interesting next context, I think, for a lot of us who maybe take insurance and the markets existing for granted to look to, because it's a mobile first in so many cases society. So, the first computer people had quite often fit in their hands. I remember going to Singapore and Hong Kong when I was in my early days in my career, and people had these giant Nokia communicators that flipped up and had little keyboards, and we didn't have anything like that. They've been computing mobily for so long, but that really changes the nature of like, what does a transaction look like? What are customer expectations? How does distribution work? I mean, the agents and brokers were the ones with these Nokia devices. So everything is just sort of like, it's not just the history of the insurance and regulation and capital side of it. It's the broader context of these communities that I find so fascinating. And you've been living that firsthand. And I felt it really comes out in very varied stories, different contexts, companies, cultures. I'd love if you just give us some color on that, and then I'm going to ruin the book and ask you to just give away the big the big takeaways. But I think it's fascinating stuff. So can you give us a little bit on kind of the diversity of the context that you see across Asia?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So my aim for this book was really to tell the stories of different companies in different parts of Asia, because, to be honest, Asia is the most populous continent globally, and it's, so vast in terms of different cultures, different economic development stages, etc., right? And also, I wanted to make this book accessible for people living in the US, living in Europe, who have never been to Asia and never worked in the insurance industry in Asia, to understand what are the unique environments these companies are operating in. So I
Yeah.
really tried each of the case studies to also give a little bit of background on the country. What are the challenges they are facing, right? And I have a really good mix, I believe, of countries that are more developed, like, Hong Kong, Singapore, those are one of the tech hubs globally.
Yeah.
So there are stories of companies there with like bolttech, Yas, OneDegree, from Hong Kong and Singapore. But I also wanted to shine some light on like the developing countries. So I have Qoala from Indonesia, PhonePe from India, which is an especially interesting case, right? It's not technically an insurtech,
Yeah.
but it's a company that is in payments. And I think that is also something that is very unique in Asia. And you touched on this a little bit, like the way insurance is marketed, distributed, etc., mobile first approach. And this is exactly what PhonePe does, like
Yeah.
making financial products available for a large population that has never consumed any financial products in the first place, let
Yeah.
alone insurance. And that is also some of the stories I want to tell, how these companies are looking at selling insurance to a population that often had no idea what insurance actually is,
Yeah.
right? So if you come to me and I've never heard about insurance and you say like, hey, you give me money and when your house burns down or if your wife gets sick, then, you get some money back. That sounds like a huge scam.
Yeah, completely.
if you,
Uh,
if you have never been in touch with that. And the way these companies manage to market to a population with such a low financial literacy and still are able to sell insurance online, it's just incredible. And I think
yeah.
there are a lot of lessons to be learned, not only for, if you're in Asia or if you're operating in a market with low financial literacy, but taking some of these lessons learned and actually also apply them to a more mature market and understand how can we better market and distribute insurance also in other places.
Yeah, there's the buzzword of embedded, right? It
Yeah.
blew up at least a year ago, and it's been a daily thing that we talk about in at least the US, probably Europe as well. Um, it's in a few of your stories, and it's not this hashtag like throw it around with excitement. It's just a natural way that these startups looked at conducting business, given the barriers to. I mean, it's exactly as you're saying. It's not like people are just going out and buying insurance and thinking about it, and so you don't have that natural space to latch onto. You have to think about embedded co-branding, payments,
Yeah.
all these other mechanisms that I think we've had the luxury of not being forced to address in, much of the more developed markets, but we're going to have to. And that's why I find it so interesting that someone could just hold the Asian market aside and say, well, that doesn't apply to us. It's not like that. Our markets are more developed. I think a lot of what we're seeing in Asia is going to be what we need to do in markets like the US soon enough. And so I found these stories fascinating for that reason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I can, share two examples, which I think is, really, really interesting. You just mentioned embedded insurance, right?
Yeah.
And the company I'm featuring, Qoala in Indonesia, um, a country worldwide with one of the lowest insurance penetration rates. I think it's
Hmm.
1.6% of GDP.
Yeah.
The US has 12.4%, I believe. And even, India has a higher insurance penetration as Indonesia. Now, when I talked to Harshad Lurunani, one of the founders of Qoala, he said, with the population so unaware of insurance, like we are looking at embedded insurance products that address, first concerns that people have on their mind, right? We are not necessarily looking at accident insurance or, anything like that, but
Yeah.
we are looking, for example, if you are using a ride-hailing service like Grab and Gojek, like what we have in the US in Uber and Lyft, you can get an insurance that covers you in case you get stuck in traffic. A huge issue. If you have ever been in Indonesia, in Jakarta, some say there is no traffic. Jakarta is a parking lot.
Yeah.
It's really sometimes traffic is not moving at all. So people are not really concerned of getting into a crash, but they're really concerned about, do I miss my flight to the, do I get in time to the airport to make my flight? So they have really designed a product that covers that concern and, made it a really small ticket insurance product for people to first test. And Luani gave a really interesting analogy. So he said he's thinking about it like, testing a spoon of ice cream
Yeah.
before you make a decision to buy a whole scoop. And that's what they are doing. And that's just the first step in their strategy to get people familiar with financial products.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I have also examples in the book of Japan. Japan is one of the largest insurance markets globally and also one of the most mature. A lot of US companies actually operate in the Japanese market. But the issue that the insurance industry is facing in Japan is that they have a rapidly aging population.
Mm.
A lot of the wealth is actually, allocated with like the older generations. So the younger generation felt kind of left behind in Japan because all the financial institutions were focusing of like the older generation, the more wealthier generation, and has
Yeah.
not thought about new products design, new designs to distribution to actually capture the younger generation of Japan. And that is something that a lot of countries are facing, right? Like Germany has an aging population, even the US has an aging
Yeah.
population.
Yeah.
So the example of Japan and concrete, the example of Habitto, the startup that is now looking to make insurance more accessible in a very mature market, but for the younger generation. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really, really try to have in the book something for everyone, like the examples of developing countries, low financial literacy, but also the example of Japan, a very mature market with, again, very unique characteristics of the
Yeah.
landscape there.
You also had a number of different stages of the companies. So I was telling someone about the book and said the word
Yeah,
startup, and then I immediately thought one of the companies is Ping An. And I don't think
right.
anyone would think of Ping An as a startup. They're what, the third largest insurer in the world or so. I mean, they're massive,
Yeah.
but they were a startup not that long ago. And it was fascinating to me to see how have they ensured the startupness of the business, if you will, is still alive and well, which I think is a great reminder for every incumbent carrier out there who uses their age as a reason why they can't, or their scale or their size. But then you have, as you said, Habito, who is still really early stage. I mean, they're not even, you couldn't even say, and this is how it all played out, because it's
No.
playing out right now. It's just starting. So, with that level of variability, very different countries, different products, different situations, different, wildly different stages of startups. And I use the term loosely as soon as we bring Ping An into it. And bolttech also, very far along in their growth. Um, you were able to pick out some real lessons across these very varied situations, which I love, because then the fact that you could do that sort of takes away someone's ability to say, no, that doesn't apply to me. It's like, look, if
Yeah.
from all this variability we can still find lessons, that's brilliant. So could you share what those major findings are?
Yeah, sure. And, I think that was actually the most fun of writing this book, right? Like first I looked at all the different case studies, 8 different companies, as you mentioned, different stages, some startups, some really early startups, some, unicorns, and Ping An as one of the largest insurers globally. And then also the different countries, different economic stages, etc. But really, at the end, there were 3 lessons that consistently emerged in all of these cases. And yeah, that was really fun to see and to realize, you know what? At the end, we are all working in the same industry, and we are all more or less facing the same challenges to a
Yeah.
degree, right? So the 3 lessons that I have found throughout these 8 case studies are: build a customer focused business, embrace change, and leverage the power of partnerships.
Teresa, I'm going to ask you to go into
Yeah.
these in more depth, but I want to recognize there's overlap with the first 3 books in the series, even though those are very US focused. And that's like, I'm not trying to harp on this, but I think it's worth people remembering. It's very easy to write something off as being irrelevant, and that's where we miss out on the chance to learn from it. And so the customer focus, your last point around partnerships, I wrote a whole book on partnerships and collaboration. Like, these are critical things that, I don't care what context you're in, what stage of company you are, these are truisms across the board. So that, fantastic takeaways. Can you take us deeper on them? Like,
Yeah,
what do these things
absolutely.
mean? Yeah.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned Ping An, and I'm really grateful for the team for taking the time and giving interviews and have their story in the book, right? Because I think the evolution of Ping An is really remarkable. You said they are not that old. So they were launched in the 80s.
Yeah.
And when Ping An first launched, there were hardly any privately owned cars in China.
Right.
Today, Ping An is the largest motor insurer in the world.
Yeah.
Within like 30, 40 years,
Yeah. It's wild.
it is completely wild. And Ping An has actually gone through a number of different development stages. And already in 2000, they have shifted from a product-driven strategy to a customer-centric strategy. And I mean, this term is not new in the insurance industry. And, a lot of companies, had this on their agenda, had this in their strategy, but not all of them have really succeeded
Yeah.
in really truly building a customer focused business.
Yeah.
And again, like Ping An was definitely one of the earliest companies to make that shift away from a product driven strategy and then build also their ecosystem. And, everything evolves around the customer and their needs.
Your point that a lot of companies have it on their agenda or they talk about it. I think it's just that for many companies, it's lip service, right? They say it and we're very customer focused and we're customer centric, but in reality, are they really? And the true question is, it's a great idea. I don't think anyone disagrees with the importance of the customer, but in practice, they're not doing it. And that's where these things get tricky. So I love the level of detail and clarity you brought to making that transition because it's not how Ping An was founded and they transitioned. And you point out like all of the different businesses that they have or they're invested in or connected to, how do they bring that to bear in this rethinking of, what's at the center of their hub and spoke model? Is it an auto product or is it a customer who has auto and health needs and, everything else that comes up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually Ping An in many ways reminds me a lot of, how Amazon operates.
Hmm.
Because Ping An started as an insurer in the 80s. Today it's a, global financial conglomerate, but also has a strong focus on health and also when we are talking about auto insurance, right? They own part of Auto Home, which is a one-stop shop of everything around, motor vehicles, etc. in China. And then they established Ping An Good Doctor, which is a virtual clinic that belongs to the Ping An Group, but it is separate from insurance. And I think that is what is really powerful here. And, if you look at Amazon, they have done something very similar. They have spun out different parts of their business, like AWS and etc. And that is all considered a business entity in itself with its own, strategy, with its own KPIs, with its own responsibilities. And I feel often that is something that insurers are not that great at, to let go of this like insurance focused theme, but really look at what is it that we are trying to solve for a customer? What is their pain point? And another company I have in the book is bolttech. And I think they are also really good at that when designing solutions on embedded insurance. So they don't come from a lens where they say, okay, we want to embed insurance in this product, in this offering of the partner. But they are coming from a perspective where they say, okay, this is the partner, this is a telecommunication company, for example. What pain points are we trying to solve there? And how can insurance enable us to make this happen, right? So it's a different thought process, not starting with insurance, but starting from the other business. And, maybe there's an insurance component to it. Maybe there's not, right? Maybe you can leverage it in other ways, like Ping An with Ping An Good Doctor. But the idea is to really start from what it is that customers actually want and need. And, I know a lot of people say it's really difficult to understand customer needs for a product like insurance, because to be honest, not even you and I wake up in the morning and say like, oh, this is an insurance product I really want. Yeah, it's really difficult to do market research on that. But there
Yeah.
are ways to understand what is it that customers are concerned about, and then try to understand how insurance can help them, minimize their risks, manage their risks, mitigate their risks, etc.
So that's embracing a customer centricity or taking a customer centered view of the business. You talked about embracing change. So I want to understand that, which sounds like it's something everyone wants to do, and it's incredibly hard to change, and
Yeah.
it's difficult and uncomfortable. And you would think, well, startups don't have to deal with that because that's the nature of startups in and of themselves, but it is something that they all face. So how does the change story come out here?
So, our super fast changing environment. I mean, just look at the past years, especially with COVID-19, how all of our lives have changed, right? Um, Probably this started with the introduction of the smartphone, where we all are doing business differently, we connect differently, etc., and that has an impact on our lives and therefore on our risks. So insurance needs to change as well. The issue is a lot of insurance incumbents find it difficult to switch and make changes. And I think it's first and foremost a mindset shift to really embrace that change. Because if you look at product design, for example, a lot of traditional insurance incumbents, they invest a lot of also market research, trying to understand, what products the market wants. But once they have designed a product, they just push it out into the market. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, it starts to blame, I don't know, the insurance distribution agent. They are not, pushing enough, or, the people who have designed the products. And it's about like blaming who is responsible for this.
Yeah.
The companies I talked to, and they were a range from Tune Protect over OneDegree, Qoala, they all said the best feedback they get is once a product is launched. They say they can do, as much feedback. And bolttech is actually another example. They put out a product on COVID-19 as a subsequent product for a telecommunication. And they thought it would fly off the shelves, but it actually didn't, because it
Yeah.
was in that situation not contextual.
Yeah.
But instead of seeing that as a failure, they take it as a learning opportunity and say, okay, the market has responded, and now we know, and now we can make the changes.
Yeah.
So this mindset shift of really embracing change and not seeing if you are not right the first time as, as a mistake or as a failure, but really as an opportunity to learn, to pivot, to make changes.
Yeah.
And again, really, really a mindset shift that is needed here in a corporate culture that embraces change and sees it as an opportunity.
Yeah. I can think of examples where maybe the carrier didn't get into the blame game. So in their eyes, they embrace change. They're not against failure. They're open to it. But what you see instead is they ignore it. So they put this out in the market, they try to do this new thing and it hasn't lived up to expectations. It's not meeting its business plan objectives. So they just sort of let it fizzle out. And then they just go on to the next. And I think a part of embracing change is exactly what you're describing of, taking a potential failure as a learning moment. But that doesn't just mean don't rag on those who you're blaming for it, but also don't just ignore it and move on. Stop and recognize the opportunity of the learning you could have done. It's like, if you're not going to get the business upside that you had hoped for, you should at least get that upside through other things that you can do better because you stopped and understood it. But simply not, belittling someone or something or placing blame isn't the same as actually recognizing it, taking the learnings and seeing it positively. And I think I've talked to enough carriers that seem to give themselves credit for not being mean about it.
Yeah.
But that's it. Ultimately, like that's good, but that's still not valuable. You still need to do the sort of post-mortem and take it as an opportunity. There's a third takeaway, partnerships, which really spoke to me because as you were sending me drafts to look at, I was finishing up the book on collaboration. And so it was very much resonated with me, but that was a really consistent theme throughout all of these stories. I mean, even Ping On, who had, tons of resources by the time you were writing this story, even they're constantly looking at partnership. It really does seem to be part of the DNA of all of these players.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, another buzzword of the time we are living in at the moment is not only embedded insurance, but it's also ecosystems. And everybody is talking about ecosystem. All the insurers are talking about ecosystems.
Yeah.
But what I find often happens, they see themselves in the middle, and then everything evolves around them.
Yeah.
And that is just not the case, right? So having really good partnership means you leverage each other's strengths. And if in a certain area, a partner is more successful, more knowledgeable, more established, right? Then you should definitely leverage that and, let that company be in the spotlight. To give you an example, bolttech is working with a range of different companies. They have a partnership with Samsung, for example. They're working with different ecosystem players in different markets in the area of financial services, but also e-commerce, etc. And when they embed in insurance, it's not so much about the carrier who is underwriting it, because in that situation, it doesn't matter. If you are getting a smartphone protection, for example, the insurance carrier brand often doesn't matter as much. But, the brand association of the original brand, of the telco, of the e-commerce site, that's the more important brand in that context. And then, a partnership has to work that that the spotlight is on them. Another example is how insurance incumbents can partner with new alternative forms of distribution for their insurance products more broadly. Like I have the example of PhonePe. So PhonePe, as mentioned, is a fintech in India. They have developed that digital wallet, digital payment system, and they have integrated insurance into their offering, which is a great way for insurers to establish, a new alternative forms of distribution. And what PhonePe is really good at, because they have this mobile-first approach, is designing these user journeys that are really easy to understand, transparent, and that's why they are able to attract a market with very low financial literacy. Again, mentioning people who have never bought insurance before, but they found that people actually use PhonePe's platform to buy insurance for the first time. So these insurance carriers are really well advised to partner with these platforms and listen to their advice and listen to their expertise. In the case of PhonePe, how to design a user journey that works for mobile, that works for people with low financial literacy, and at the end, both parties win. PhonePe wins because they are adding a new revenue model to their business model. And the insurer wins because they are adding a new distribution channel to it. And similar to what Sam Jyoti is at the moment building with Habitto in Japan, right? She is also working with established companies, but looking at a distribution from a mobile-first approach, attracting younger generations. And the reality is you can't be good at everything. It is just, even a big multinational company like Ping An is not good at everything. But they are building either dedicated ventures for these different parts or are partnering or investing in startups actually across the globe. I have this example where they are partnering with Snapsheet in the US and, use some of the technology they have developed in China. So you can actually argue that Ping An is operating with some of the biggest US motor insurers through their partnership with Snapsheet. If Ping An would have tried to enter the market by themselves, they probably would not have made such a progress in such a little time.
Yeah. I mean, that takes a whole different mindset around to your point about where you sit in the ecosystem, the level of humility or humbleness that it takes to not have to force feed yourself in the center. But this is where the lessons really tie together, because that takes recognizing the customer and their true needs. And then rather than saying it has to start with me, now what can I do for the customer? It's like, well, what did the customer need? It's, it's to their point around, or to your point around, what was the brand they cared about? They cared about the Samsung phone or where they bought it or who their mobile operator is, not the insurance company. So you can't sit in the middle. You must be a partner player. And you have to be comfortable with that. It is, the whole thing ties together. And it comes back to mindsets, which I'm a big fan of. I don't think the technology in any of what we're talking about matters. It's an enabler, but it's not the core thing. It really does come down to the mindset, the culture, the attitude, and the leadership around that. Theresa, I know you said you spent over a year on this. I think it's important for people to understand you didn't just observe and write off of what you read or listened to, or you got in with all of these people, with these companies. You talked to a lot of the founders of, certainly the vast majority of these stories were told by the founders or the people running the insurance business or the insurance business in Asia. It's all firsthand. You spent many, many hours putting this together. It's fantastic. I'm really excited to be able to bring this out, and thank you for sharing the details around the book. Hopefully people are excited for it.
Bryan, also thank you so much, because without you, this book would have never existed in the first place. And I'm really grateful for all the support, guidance, mentorship you provided. It was amazing. And yeah, really excited that we are launching this book now on October 17th.
We'll see. We leverage the power of partnerships to make it happen.
Yes.
So you said it is coming out October 17th. It's
Yes.
available now if people want to pre-order it, which is very
Correct.
exciting. And I will link to all of that in the show notes. But Theresa, I can't thank you enough, not just for sitting down today, which is great, but what you put into this project. It was so important to me that we not just have the US be the focus of this book series. And there couldn't have been a better person to do this, to do justice to these stories. And you've done a fantastic job. So I'm so thrilled to have this book be part of the Future of Insurance series. So thank you for writing it. I'm so excited for Theresa and for the whole Future of Insurance series for the launch of this new book, The Future of Insurance, Volume 4, Asia Rising. You can find it on Amazon. It's up for pre-order right now on Kindle, and it will be available widely in every Amazon store globally in print, Kindle, and paperback. It will also be available on Audible, read by Theresa, with a couple of pieces read by me. Amazing project. I'm so excited to have been a part of it. You can get to the links to each one of those Amazon stores at future-of-insurance.com/Asia. You can find out a little bit more about the book, and we've linked up all of the stores globally so you can get to it super easily. And of course, you can also just go to amazon.com, search for Theresa Blissing, or search for Future of Insurance, and all of the books in the series will come up, volumes 1 through 4 now. So future-of-insurance.com/Asia. Thank you so much, and I hope you tune in next time and check out the book. Fascinating, intriguing stories that all of us can grow from. Thanks, everyone.